Welcome to Reformed Thinking. So, today we are taking a deep dive into something that feels really deeply personal, even if it starts with a scenario that, most of us hope we never actually experience.
Right. Yeah, you really do not want to find yourself in this exact situation.
No, definitely not. I want you to imagine just for a second that you are the defendant in a massively high-stakes courtroom drama. You have been sitting at that heavy wooden table for months.
Oh, man, just the anxiety of that.
Right. It is suffocating. Your life, your entire future has just been hanging in the balance. And then you get to the climax. The judge walks in the room, goes completely silent. He strikes the gavel, and he says two words, not guilty.
Which is the absolute best thing you could possibly hear.
The ultimate relief.
Yeah.
In that split second, the tension that has been just crushing you, it evaporates, the music swells, you hug your defense attorney, you walk out the double doors of the courthouse, and you are a completely free person.
It is an incredible definitive moment.
It is. But then you wake up the next morning.
Yeah, reality hits.
Exactly. The trial is over. But you still have to pay rent. You still have to navigate a broken world. You still have to figure out how to just live.
And your defense attorney, the one who fought for you so brilliantly, he has already packed his briefcase and moved on to his next case in another city.
Right. The courtroom is closed, the lights are off, and suddenly you realize you are entirely on your own again.
It is a chilling thought when you really frame it that way, because the legal victory is secure, but the daily reality of surviving the aftermath is entirely on your shoulders.
You have your freedom, but you have zero ongoing advocate.
And that feeling, that sense of being legally acquitted but functionally abandoned is exactly how we so often tend to treat our spiritual lives.
Yes, and that brings us to our mission for this deep dive. We really want to unpack what might be one of the most neglected but profoundly comforting truths in the Christian faith, which is the present heavenly intercession of Jesus Christ.
It is so crucial because we spend so much time, and we should doing this, but we focus on the past.
Right, what Jesus did 2,000 years ago on the cross.
Exactly, to secure that not guilty verdict. But today we're exploring what he is actively doing right now.
Yeah, and we're going to center this whole conversation around a single massive text, Hebrews chapter 7, verse 25.
Which is incredibly necessary because when we lose sight of what Christ is doing right now in the present, we naturally develop a condition that the theological sources we are looking at today diagnose as functional deism.
Functional deism.
Yeah.
Let us pause right there, because that sounds like a term you would hear in a seminary classroom.
It does sound a bit academic, yeah.
What does that actually look like for you on a random Tuesday morning when you were just trying to get through the week?
Well, it is an exhausting way to live. Deism historically is the belief that God created the world, wound it up like a clock, and then stepped back to just let it run on its own.
Like he just completely walked away.
Right, without interfering at all. Functional deism means that even if you do not officially believe that on paper, it is how you actually operate in your daily life.
So it is a subconscious thing.
Very much so. It is the subconscious belief that yes, Jesus secured your legal acquittal on the cross. He won the verdict in the past. But now your daily survival, your moral maintenance, your ability to endure suffering, all of that rests entirely on your own fragile shoulders.
Wow, so we start treating salvation like a historical math equation rather than a living, continuous reality.
Precisely. The human heart naturally operates under this delusion that Christ's love throbbed powerfully at Calvary, but then it sort of cooled down upon his ascension into heaven.
Like he settled into this posture of just kindly indifference.
Or worse, austere supervision.
Oh, like a manager with a clipboard. We picture him sitting up there in heaven tapping his watch, just supervising from a distance to see if we mess up the clean slate he gave us.
And if you view God as a manager with a clipboard, your spiritual life becomes this cold mechanical process of trying to maintain your metrics.
Which just fosters an unceasing low-grade spiritual anxiety. You are always wondering if you have done enough to stay in his good graces.
But to cure this anxiety, we have a remarkable journey ahead of us today. We are going to travel back to the 1st century Roman Empire to understand the desperate life-or-death crisis of the original Hebrew Christians.
Yes, setting the stage is so important here.
We will also dive into the actual Greek mechanics of Christ's unbreakable priesthood to see how the inner workings of heaven operate right now. And finally, we will apply all of this to how you face your own daily guilt, your recurring sin, and your profound suffering.
I think we need to start by grounding this in reality, because it is so easy to read an ancient text like Hebrews and imagine the author sitting in a quiet, climate-controlled study just writing abstract theology.
Right, just philosophical musings.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the original audience was in the absolute trenches. They were in a crisis. Why was this letter written in the first place?
To understand the letter to the Hebrews, you really have to immerse yourself in the terrifying reality of the first century Greco-Roman world.
Which was not a friendly place for a new religion.
Not at all. This epistle was written to a community of Jewish Christians, likely just before the destruction of the Jerusalem temple in AD 70.
Okay, so tensions are already incredibly high.
Beyond high. In the ancient world, religion was not a private internal feeling like we treat it today. It was deeply tied to visible structures, community identity, and the state.
So to step away from the ancient traditions of national Israel was not just seen as a personal spiritual choice.
No, by their Jewish countrymen, it was viewed as high treason against the God of Abraham. And by the Roman authorities, it was viewed as participation in an illegal, subversive sect that threatened the peace of the empire.
So they were basically being squeezed from both sides.
Yeah.
We were talking about severe social ostracization here. If I am a Jewish Christian in the first century, what does my life actually look like?
You are losing everything.
Yeah.
The text itself describes how these believers were enduring public reproach. They were having their property confiscated.
That is terrifying.
Imagine waking up and finding out your business has been seized, your home has been plundered, and the legal system offers you zero protection because you belong to an unapproved religion.
Because you do not have the right legal status.
Exactly. Furthermore, there was the looming, terrifying threat of physical martyrdom. They were watching their friends be imprisoned or worse.
That level of constant adrenaline and fear, I mean, you can only sustain that for so long before you just completely burn out.
Which is exactly what was happening. They were exhausted. The author describes them as becoming weary, spiritually sluggish, and dangerously tempted to shrink back.
Shrink back to the old ways.
Yes. And you have to understand the immense psychological pull of what they were tempted to shrink back to. They were Jewish believers. They had grown up in the Old Covenant Levitical system.
And that system was overwhelmingly powerfully tangible.
Highly sensory. Think about it. You had massive visible altars. You had the constant scent of smoking sacrifices and burning incense filling the air.
You could literally smell your religion.
You could. You had majestic priestly garments. The high priest would wear this intricate breastplate with the names of the 12 tribes engraved on precious stones.
Like he is literally carrying the nation on his chest into the presence of God.
Exactly. You had an actual physical, magnificent earthly temple in Jerusalem.
And these early believers had walked away from all of that to follow an invisible Messiah who was crucified like a criminal and had ascended into the clouds completely out of sight.
It is a massive leap.
I am trying to put myself in their shoes, and honestly, I get it. We crave visible proof. We want something we can touch to know that we are safe.
It is human nature.
It reminds me of the shift we have seen in banking over the last couple of decades. Even today, with all our technology, a lot of people still desperately prefer a physical bank branch.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Like when the economy gets shaky, you want to walk into a grand building with marble columns. You want to see the thick steel door of the vault.
You want to talk to a real person?
Yes, you want to hand your money to a human teller and get a stamped paper receipt. There is a deep psychological comfort in the physical structure.
Tangible security.
Right. Trusting a purely digital ledger, an invisible series of ones and zeros floating in a server you will never see. It takes a massive leap of trust, especially if there is a financial panic.
Which is exactly what they were going through, a spiritual financial panic.
It feels like these Hebrew Christians had closed their account at the massive physical bank branch of the Jerusalem temple, and their new high priest was entirely invisible. They were looking around in a panic, asking, how do we actually know we are safe? Where is the proof?
That captures the psychological dynamic perfectly. They felt spiritually and physically exposed. They wanted to go back to the marble columns and the visible vault.
So how does the author address that?
Well, what is fascinating is how the author of Hebrews answers this panic. He does not offer them a new earthly building. He does not give them physical trinkets to hold on to.
Okay, so what does he do?
Instead, he systematically analyzes the intentional design flaws of that physical bank branch, the Levitical priesthood, to show them why going back would be catastrophic.
design flaws.
Mm.
So the Old Testament system was not broken by accident. It was actually built to be insufficient.
Exactly. It was never meant to be the final solution. It was a pedagogical shadow, a teaching tool meant to point to something greater, and it had massive built-in insufficiencies.
What was the biggest one?
First and foremost, the mortal priests died. Think about the anxiety of that system. You have a high priest, you trust someone who goes into the Holy of Holies on the Day of Atonement to make intercession for the nation.
And he does a good job. You feel safe.
But eventually that priest gets old, he gets sick, and he has a funeral. Aaron died, Eleazar died. Death brutally interrupted every single priestly tenure. Your mediator was always expiring.
Which means your security is always on a timer.
Yeah.
You're constantly waiting for the next guy to take over and hoping he is as good.
Exactly. Secondly, the sacrifices themselves were insufficient. The blood of bulls and goats could provide ceremonial purification. It could make you legally clean to participate in the community, but it could not actually clear the human conscience.
It could not wash the internal guilt away.
No, it could not remove internal guilt before a holy God. It was a temporary cover, not a permanent cure.
But perhaps the most striking design flaw is found in the furniture of the tabernacle itself.
Yes, the furniture.
Well, this is the detail that completely stopped me in my tracks when I was looking through this material. If you read through the meticulous blueprints God gives Moses in the book of Exodus, there is an altar of incense, a golden lampstand, the table of showbread, the Ark of the Covenant. But there are absolutely no chairs.
None. Not a single place to sit down.
Which seems like a minor interior design choice until you realize the theological implications.
It is massive.
Why are there no chairs? Because the work of a human priest was never ever finished. They were not allowed to sit down.
It was a continuous, endless, bloody slaughter of animals. A daily, perpetual conveyor belt of sacrifices that served as a constant reminder that sin had not actually been dealt with permanently.
And that reality forces a desperate, agonizing question for the listener. If earthly priests always die, and if their work is never actually finished, how can you or I ever have permanent, restful peace with God?
You cannot. Not under that system.
This profound realization is what drives the author of Hebrews to introduce a radically different kind of priesthood to cure their anxiety. If the tribe of Levi is fundamentally flawed by death and incompletion, we need a priest for an entirely different order.
And this takes us to the ancient, deeply mysterious figure of Melchizedek.
Yes, Melchizedek.
If you are reading through the Bible straight from the beginning, he is one of the most jarring characters. You are in Genesis chapter 14 following the story of Abraham. Abraham has just won a battle. He is returning with the spoils, and suddenly out of nowhere, this guy Melchizedek walks onto the page.
Just appears completely unannounced.
Right. Abraham gives him a tenth of his spoils. Melchizedek blesses him, and then he just vanishes. No backstory, no follow-up. He is a crucial typological blueprint. The argument made in Hebrews reaches entirely behind the tribe of Levi, bypassing the entire Mosaic law, and anchors itself in Genesis 14 and a prophetic oath found in Psalm 110.
Okay, what is the oath?
In that psalm, God swears an unbreakable oath to the coming Messiah, saying, "You are a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek."
You have to understand what a massive shock this was to the first century Jewish system. The promised Messiah, the Davidic king, was universally understood to come from the tribe of Judah.
But the priests had to come from the tribe of Levi.
Right, in the earthly legal constitution of ancient Israel, there was a strict separation of powers. Kings could not be priests, and priests could not be kings.
It was forbidden.
If a king tried to offer incense in the temple, God struck him with leprosy. It was a hard boundary.
But Melchizedek predates that law, and he holds both offices simultaneously. His very name, Melchizedek, translates from Hebrew as King of Righteousness.
Wow, King of Righteousness.
And he ruled over a city called Salem, which would later become Jerusalem, making him the King of Peace. So he is the King of Righteousness and the King of Peace.
That is an incredible parallel to Jesus.
Furthermore, he appears in the Genesis narrative without any recorded genealogy, no record of his birth, no record of his death.
Which, for a Jewish historical text, is really weird. Genealogies are everywhere.
Exactly. Now, he was a historical human being who lived and died, but literally, the way Genesis presents him, he serves as a shadow of the eternal Son of God.
So the author of Hebrews uses this ancient figure to prove that a superior permanent priesthood exists completely outside the fragile, dying tribal lineage of Levi.
Yes. The author is telling these terrified Jewish Christians, I know you miss the Levitical priests, but they were always meant to be replaced by someone better.
And what makes this New Covenant priesthood superior is not just its royal bloodline, it is its vitality. I was looking at how Hebrews 7.24 phrases this right before our main verse. It says, Christ holds his priesthood permanently. And the Greek word used there is really specific.
The Greek word is aparabatos. This is a brilliant term. It essentially means unchangeable, inviolable, or non-transferable.
So like a permanent legal status.
It was sometimes used in legal contexts to describe a law or a ruling that could not be overturned or passed to another jurisdiction.
So why does Jesus hold his priesthood in an aparabatos way?
Because he conquered death. The Levitical priests had to transfer their office because they kept dying. Jesus was crucified, he died, he was buried, but 3 days later, he resurrected with an indestructible life.
And because he will never die again, his priesthood can never be interrupted, cannot be passed to a successor.
It is almost like a relay race.
Oh, I love this analogy. The Levitical priesthood was this endless, exhausting relay race. The baton is the priesthood, the responsibility to represent the people before God.
Right, so Aaron grabs the baton and runs.
But eventually he collapses on the track and dies. So he has to pass it to Eleazar. Eleazar runs his leg of the race, gets old, dies, and passes it to Phinehas. On and on it goes century after century. It is a fragile system because it depends on dying men.
But then Jesus steps onto the track.
He takes the baton, he runs the race, he runs headfirst into death itself, bursts through the other side, crosses the finish line, and he just stops.
He holds the baton forever.
He never has to pass it to anyone else because death has absolutely no claim on him anymore.
That is exactly the dynamic. He is the final runner. And this brings us directly to the theological pivot of the entire argument. This is where we hit Hebrews 7.25.
The core text.
Yes. The verse begins with a crucial transition word. In English, it usually says consequently, or therefore, or wherefore. The Greek word is hothen.
That feels like a very loaded consequently. It is pulling the weight of everything we just talked about.
It is the hinge upon which your entire salvation swings. The logic is this. Because Christ's life is indestructible because he holds that baton forever and his priesthood is non-transferable, a massive legal and saving consequence is triggered for you today.
Okay, what is the consequence?
It means he possesses the absolute, inherent, unrelenting capacity to execute a comprehensive salvation. The text says, consequently, he is able to save. The Greek verb used for able is dynatai, from which we get words like dynamic or dynamite.
Oh, wow. So it is an explosive kind of power.
It denotes sovereign power and absolute legal competence. He's not just willing to save you, he is objectively, powerfully able to accomplish the task.
But I think this is where the rubber meets the road for a lot of people.
How so?
Well, if I am listening to this, I might think, okay, I believe Jesus has power. I believe he is strong. But my life is a disaster. My track record of failure is incredibly long. My mess is deeply complicated.
Right, the personal application is hard.
How far does his ability to save actually reach? Does it reach the bottom of my specific barrel?
That is the most human question you can ask, and to answer it, we have to examine the specific extent of this salvation as defined by the text.
Which is the next part of the verse.
The phrase that follows, he is able to save, is the absolute center of our deep dive today. In the Greek, it is eis to pantelis. English Bibles usually translate this as to the uttermost or completely or forever.
To the uttermost. That is a staggering phrase. What does eis to pantelis actually encompass?
It is entirely comprehensive, and it carries a dual meaning that covers every possible angle of your anxiety.
Let us hear it.
First, it means temporal permanence. He saves forever to the furthest extent of time. There is no expiration date on his advocacy.
Yeah, so time will not run out on this.
Exactly. Second, it means qualitative perfection. He saves completely to the deepest extent of your need. He does not leave the job half-finished.
To put it bluntly, it is the exact opposite of making someone merely salvable.
Yes. Christ does not just give you a favorable opportunity to save yourself. He does not just wipe your slate clean at the beginning and say, all right, I did the first 90%. Now the final 10% is up to your good behavior and spiritual discipline.
Which is so completely counterintuitive to how we operate. We are wired for merit.
We really are.
We are wired to believe that you get what you earn. So we naturally default to this hybrid model where Jesus starts the process, but we have to finish it.
We do. And to really grasp how radical is to pantelis is It is fascinating to look at the only other place this exact phrase is used in the entire New Testament.
Where is it?
You find it in the Gospel of Luke chapter 13. Jesus is teaching in a synagogue on the Sabbath, and there is a woman who has been crippled by a spirit for 18 years. She is bent completely double.
Just a horrific physical condition.
And the text describes her condition using this phrase, she was unable to straighten up at all. Eyes to Pantelis.
So it is used to describe total inability.
Her physical inability was total. It was absolute. She could not contribute a single fraction of effort to her own healing. And the argument being made here is that just as her inability was total, Christ's ability to save is total.
His eyes to Pantelis perfectly answers our eyes to Pantelis.
Exactly.
Let me see if I can map this onto how we experience this today, because the distinction between being salvable and being saved completely changes everything about how you sleep at night.
It changes your entire worldview.
I think modern self-reliance, that functional deism we discussed earlier, it treats salvation like a glider. You know how a glider works, right?
Yeah, it has no engine.
Right, it has no engine of its own. To get it into the air, a powerful motorized plane has to hook up a tow cable speed down the runway and drag the glider up into the sky.
Right.
In our minds, that motorized plane is Jesus. At the moment of justification, he does the heavy lifting. He pulls us out of our sin, forgives our past, and gets us off the ground.
But then what?
But then once we hit cruising altitude, we think, he cuts the tow cord.
And you are on your own.
And now you are sitting in this engineless glider. You are entirely responsible for reading the wind, finding the invisible thermals of your own good works, your Bible, reading your moral choices to keep yourself in the air.
That is terrifying.
And the terrifying reality is if you hit a spiritual downdraft, if you mess up badly enough, you are going to lose altitude and crash into the side of a mountain.
That is a profoundly exhausting way to live. You would spend your entire life staring at the altimeter in absolute panic.
Yes, because your security is entirely dependent on your performance.
But the argument in Hebrews 7 completely obliterates the glider model. Salvation is not a glider, it is an airplane.
Christ is the engine.
Exactly. You are securely seated inside the plane, and the exact same engine that roared down the runway to pull you off the ground is the engine that will continuously carry you every single inch of the way until you land safely at your destination. You do not keep the plane in the air. The plane keeps you in the air.
That imagery captures the essence of ease to Pantelis perfectly, and it is important to note how this comprehensive view of salvation dismantles some very common theological errors that creep into our thinking.
Yes. Now, presenting the arguments from the material we are analyzing today, impartially they point out that this text acts as a decisive rejection of legalism.
Right.
Legalism is the framework that suggests human beings must somehow supplement the finished work of Christ with their own moral performance or religious rituals to maintain their justified standing before God.
Right, because if he truly saves to the uttermost, then by definition there is no blank space left on the canvas for your supplementary work. If you try to add to a complete salvation, you are actually insulting the sufficiency of the Savior.
Precisely. And on the flip side, the material argues that this verse also rejects the framework of Arminianism.
Let us define that for a second, because we do not want to throw around theological terms without explaining them. What exactly is the Arminian view in this context?
Broadly speaking, within this specific debate, Arminianism holds that while salvation is by grace, a true born-again believer retains the free will to permanently walk away from Christ, thereby losing their salvation and perishing eternally.
So you can choose to jump out of the airplane, basically. But the authors we are reading argue forcefully against that based on this text. Their logic is this. If a truly justified believer could ultimately fall away and be damned, then Christ would not be a high priest who saves to the uttermost.
He would just be a high priest who saves up to a certain point.
He would merely be a bystander who saves, for the most part, or up until the point of human failure.
The argument here is that ease to Pantelis guarantees an unbroken chain of deliverance across the board.
It guarantees deliverance from the penalty of sin in your past, deliverance from the dominating power of sin in your present daily life, and ultimately deliverance from the very presence of sin in your future glorification.
Okay, that is a staggering magnitude of security. But it naturally raises a vital question. If this complete, uttermost salvation exists, who exactly receives it?
Right, because it is not universal.
Because the text does not say that Jesus automatically saves every single human being who has ever lived. There is a specific parameter? Yes, there is a very clear condition, or perhaps a better way to phrase it, is a characteristic posture of the person who receives this salvation. The text says, He is able to save to the uttermost those who draw near to God through him.
The Greek phrase used for those who draw near is "tubadius proserkomenes." Let us break that down. What does that actually imply about the Christian life?
The grammatical detail here is incredibly revealing. Proserkomenes is a present tense participle. In Greek, the present tense does not just mean something is happening right now, it indicates a continuous, ongoing characteristic action.
So it is a lifestyle.
It is not describing a single isolated decision in the past. It is not about someone who walked down a church aisle 20 years ago, prayed a prayer, signed a card, and then lived the rest of their life with zero regard for God.
According to this text, the authentic Christian life is defined by a continuous, habitual, daily drawing near to God.
It was originally a technical liturgical term in the ancient Greek translation of the Old Testament, used specifically for priests who are approaching the altar to offer sacrifices. Now, that immense privilege of approaching the holy presence of God belongs to every believer.
But there's a massive qualifier attached to this drawing near. The text says they draw near to God through him. These ought to.
Oh!
Through Jesus.
This establishes the absolute exclusivity of the mediator. There is no direct, unmediated access to God for fallen humanity. You cannot just waltz into the throne room on your own.
I have to pause here. I want to push back on this because if there is any concept in this entire text that grates against our modern sensibilities, it is this one.
I completely agree. It is very controversial today.
We live in a culture in 2026 that elevates plurality above almost everything else. We highly value the idea of multiple paths to the divine. We talk about finding your own truth and spiritual pragmatism, whatever works for you, whatever brings you peace.
Yes, the culture is very pluralistic.
So when this ancient text claims exclusivity, when it says you can only draw near to the creator of the universe through this one specific historical Jewish man who lived 2,000 years ago, does not that sound incredibly narrow?
It sounds very rigid.
Does not it sound arbitrary, like God is artificially bottlenecking salvation just to be difficult?
It absolutely sounds narrow to the modern ear. It sounds exclusionary. But the theological analysis we're looking at provides a vital explanation for this exclusivity.
Okay, let us hear it.
They argue that this is not an arbitrary bottleneck. God is not just setting up a VIP list to keep people out. The exclusivity of Christ is a legal and holy necessity.
Walk me through that. Why is it a necessity? If God is infinitely loving, why can he not just accept anyone who sincerely tries to reach him regardless of the path?
Because we often forget the other side of God's nature, his infinite holiness and perfect justice. Ancient peoples actually understood this much better than we do. In almost every ancient culture, there was an innate understanding that human beings are deeply flawed, and the divine is terrifyingly pure. They knew instinctively that you could not just approach a deity without a mediator and a blood sacrifice to cover your offenses.
The argument here is that human sin is an infinite offense against an infinitely holy creator. God is described in Hebrews as a consuming fire.
Exactly, a consuming fire.
To approach a consuming fire based on your own merit, your own good intentions, or your own sincerity, without the covering of a perfect penal substitute, would not result in enlightenment. It would result in instant holy destruction.
I see. So it is not like God is running an exclusive country club where you have to know the secret password to get past the bouncer.
Right, it's not a social club.
It is more like there is a raging 1,000-degree fire, and Jesus is the only one who possesses the fireproof suit. If you want to walk through the fire and live, you do not complain about the suit being the only option you put it on.
That is a profound way to visualize it. The open way to God is exclusive precisely because Christ alone possesses the perfect atoning blood required to satisfy the demands of divine justice.
No one else lived a sinless life. No one else bore the infinite wrath of God on the cross. Therefore, no one else is qualified to mediate.
And because of this strict, uncompromising exclusivity, the theological material we are studying takes a very hard line against adding any co-mediators. We are tasked with outlining their arguments here, and they apply this principle to reject several different frameworks, both historical and modern.
What kind of frameworks are they taking aim at?
Historically, they argue against systems found in Roman Catholicism that seek to insert canonized saints or the Virgin Mary as co-mediators or intercessors. The authors contend that praying to saints obscures the finality and the singular sufficiency of Christ's priesthood.
If Christ saves to the uttermost, you do not need a secondary advocate to get his attention.
But they also critique modern evangelical practices. They reject emotional mysticism, where people try to bypass the intellect and the historical work of Christ to achieve a direct ecstatic experience with God.
They also reject church pragmatism, market-driven entertainment, or psychological self-help, arguing that these substitute humanly engineered systems for the actual heavenly priesthood of Christ.
It is interesting to see how they apply this ancient framework to modern cultural debates, too. I noticed the texts spend time arguing against current sociological movements.
Yes, from their perspective, they heavily critique modern ideological frameworks like critical race theory and certain social justice movements. Now, to clearly state their argument without taking a political side, the authors claim that these modern ideologies attempt to reduce the Christian gospel to horizontal socio-political restructuring.
So focusing purely on human-to-human issues.
Exactly. They argue these frameworks divide humanity along earthly lines of class, race, and power dynamics, focusing entirely on horizontal victimhood and human reconciliation, while completely ignoring the fundamental infinite vertical offense of human sin against a holy God.
So their critique is that if you focus entirely on fixing the horizontal relationships between people, but ignore the vertical alienation between humanity and God, you are not actually solving the deepest problem.
That is their stance, yes. They assert that true salvation and true reconciliation require addressing the vertical alienation first, which can only be accomplished through the exclusive mediation and shed blood of Jesus Christ.
Okay, so we have established that Christ saves completely, and we know that we must approach exclusively through him. But this brings us to what I think is the most mind-bending part of this entire deep dive.
The mechanics of it all.
What is the actual mechanism in heaven right now that secures this salvation? What is Jesus actually doing at this exact moment? Is he just sitting quietly on a throne?
The second half of Hebrews 7.25 gives us the precise answer, since he always lives to make intercession for them.
The Greek word translated as to make intercession is entenchein. Let's dig into that, because intercession can sound like a really dusty, archaic church word.
It does. It sounds very formal.
When a first-century Greek speaker heard that word, what popped into their mind?
The socio-legal background of this word is incredibly illuminating. If you look at ancient Hellenistic Greek texts and Greco-Roman papyri, entenchein and its noun form, entituxis, were not primarily religious words. They were technical, legal, and political terms.
Oh, so we are back to the law.
Very much so. They were used to describe the act of presenting a formal petition, making an official appeal, or providing legal representation before a king, a governor, or a magistrate on behalf of a vulnerable party.
So we are right back in the courtroom from our opening analogy. We are squarely in the Supreme Court of the universe. Jesus is acting as your exalted defense attorney, your legal representative before the bench of the Father. His very presence at the right hand of God in a glorified human body bearing the scars of crucifixion is an unbroken, legally binding appeal on your behalf.
But let me stop you, because this is where my brain gets tangled up, and I know I'm not alone in this.
What is the hang-up?
When I try to picture Jesus interceding or advocating for me in heaven, my fear is that he is up there frantically begging the Father.
Oh, I see what you mean.
I picture Jesus standing in front of a furious, thunderous God saying, "Come on, Dad, give them another chance, please. I know they messed up again today. I know they're a disaster, but just be nice to them for my sake." It feels like Jesus is trying to hold back a reluctant father who is just itching to smite us.
That is a very common, very terrifying misconception, and it requires a crucial Trinitarian clarification.
Please clarify, because it is a scary image. The authors are absolutely adamant about this. Jesus is not desperately begging a reluctant father. If you believe that you have absorbed a pagan corruption of the gospel, you are pitting the persons of the Trinity against each other.
Right. You make them oppose each other.
The Father is not reluctant. The Father already loves you. It was the Father who originated the plan of salvation in eternity past. It was the Father who so loved the world that he sent the Son.
Okay, that makes sense. But if the Father is not angry and he is not reluctant, then what exactly is the intercession? If he does not need to be persuaded, what is Jesus doing?
The intercession is the joyful, authoritative, legal presentation of Christ's finished, perfect sacrifice.
So he is just holding up the evidence.
He is not vocalizing desperate pleas. He is judicially presenting his merit. He presents his flawless act of obedience, the perfect life he lived, and his shed blood as the unanswerable objective legal ground of your acceptance.
And how does the Father react to that?
The Father does not merely tolerate this plea, the Father delights to receive it, because the Father and the Son are in perfect eternal harmony regarding your salvation.
That reframing changes everything. It connects so perfectly to a pastoral insight that I know was highlighted in our material drawn from Dane Ortlund's fantastic book, Gentle and Lowly.
Yes. Ortlund's insight into the heart of Christ is profound when applied to this doctrine.
Because we often harbor this dark, quiet suspicion about Jesus. We believe that his love for us peaked at the cross.
We think that was the high point.
We know he loved us enough to die for us back then. But now, after years of watching us stumble, after watching us commit the same sins over and over, we suspect his love has degraded. We assume it has cooled into a sort of grumpy, frustrated tolerance.
We imagine him sighing heavily, saying, I died for you, and this is how you repay me. Really?
Exactly. We project our own human exhaustion onto the divine heart. But Ortlund argues, and the material affirms, that Christ's heavenly intercession is the constant, unyielding heartbeat of his gentle and lowly character toward weak saints.
His intercession is the present-day manifestation of his deep affection. His heart has not cooled by a single degree. If you want to know how Jesus feels about you right now at this exact moment when you are struggling on doing health, look at his intercession. Okay. He is actively, joyfully pleading your case.
This creates such a vital distinction between justification and intercession. I want to make sure we parse this out clearly so the listener has a firm grasp on how these two things work together.
In Protestant theology, justification and intercession are the twin pillars of a believer's eternal security. They do different things, but they are inseparable.
Let us define justification first.
Justification is the once-for-all legal declaration of righteousness in the divine courtroom. It is an event. It happened in the past when you believed. It is completely finished and cannot be repeated.
Okay, and intercession?
Intercession, on the other hand, is the continuous, moment-by-moment, heavenly application of that past justification to your present reality.
Let me try to put this in everyday terms to make sure I'm tracking. Justification is the judge banging the gavel on the desk and declaring, not guilty. The penalty is paid. That is a historical fact.
Right, it is on the record.
But intercession is the defense attorney standing next to you every single day for the rest of your life. And every time the prosecution, Satan, or your own conscience levels a new accusation against you for a sin you committed today, the defense attorney holds up that original court document and says, objection. This has already been settled. The blood covers this. Here is the proof.
That is a brilliant way to summarize it. In the past, Jesus accomplished what he now speaks of in the present. Jesus continuously pleads what he then accomplished. Intercession is essentially the relentless hitting of the refresh button upon your legal acquittal in the Supreme Court of Heaven, every second of every day.
This breathtaking reality of the heavenly courtroom, it is not meant to just stay in the clouds as abstract theology. The whole point of the book of Hebrews is that this doctrine is supposed to radically alter how you live in the mud and the trenches of daily life.
It has to have practical application.
The material we are studying provides some incredibly direct, piercing pastoral application for this. They divide the audience into three specific categories: the unconverted sinner, the struggling believer, and the sufferer. Let us walk through these because I think everyone listening falls into one of these buckets today.
Let us start with the unconverted sinner. This is the person who is currently outside of this mediation, trying to carry the crushing weight of their own guilt, trying to navigate life through their own functional deism.
What is the message for them?
The text issues a very clear, uncompromising call. You must abandon your self-righteousness.
And that is the hardest thing for human beings to do. We are addicted to moralism.
We want to earn it.
Moralism is the belief that you can and must clean yourself up before approaching a holy God. You think I need to get my act together? I need to stop drinking so much. I need to fix my marriage. I need to start giving to charity, and then God will accept me.
But the absolute exclusivity of Christ's mediation means you cannot buy your way in. You have to come bankrupt. You must come with entirely empty hands.
As the authors note, the promise of Hebrews 7.25 is not that Christ reluctantly tolerates the properly polished moral elite. The promise is that he completely saves those who approach God through him.
You must plead Christ alone. You have to cast away your idols, drop the weapons of your rebellion, stop trying to present your own resume, and trust that his righteousness and his blood are entirely sufficient for you.
Okay, what about the second category? The struggling believer. I honestly think this is where this doctrine hits closest to home for the vast majority of listeners.
Oh, without a doubt.
This is the Christian who is deeply burdened by recurring sin, by habits they cannot seem to break, and by a heavy blanket of shame.
The natural human instinct ever since Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden is to hide from God when we sin.
When a believer stumbles into a recurring sin, the internal monologue usually sounds like this. I cannot pray right now. I'm too dirty. I need to put a few good days between my failure and my next prayer. I need to string together a flawless week before I can confidently approach the throne of grace again.
Yes, We literally put ourselves in a spiritual timeout. We think we have to sit in the corner and feel bad for a few days to prove to God that we are really sorry, and then maybe he will listen to us again.
We do. But the theological analysis explains why this instinct, while it feels very pious and respectful, is actually a fundamental rejection of Christ's present work.
When you hide from God to clean yourself up, you are acting as if your acceptance is based on your fluctuating daily performance rather than his unchanging aparabatos priesthood.
The pastoral application here is absolutely vital, and it is counterintuitive. When you sin, you must repent toward the priest, not away from him.
Repent toward the priest. That changes the entire trajectory of guilt. Shame tells you hide until you are better, but the gospel tells you come immediately through the one who cleanses.
Presumption says that your sin does not matter, but the cross declares its infinite cost. Despair tells you that your failure is stronger than God's grace, but the empty tomb and the heavenly session of Christ answer that the sin-bearing priest lives forever.
Your standing before God does not rise and fall like the stock market, based on your daily victories and defeats. It is anchored permanently in the indestructible life of your representative.
That is incredibly freeing. Let us move to the third category, the sufferer. There is someone listening right now who is in deep, relentless physical pain, or they are battling a suffocating clinical depression, or they are facing economic ruin and they are staring up at a heaven that feels entirely silent. How does a heavenly intercessor help them?
Suffering presents a unique, agonizing temptation. The material warns that profound pain often tempts you to interpret God's heart before you interpret Scripture.
A prolonged degenerative illness whispers to you that heaven has forgotten you. A sudden tragic bereavement suggests that prayer is pointless and God is entirely indifferent to your tears.
I think of this temptation like trying to predict the climate by looking at the weather. This is an analogy that has helped me profoundly in my own life.
Do not read the heart of Christ by the changing weather of your earthly providence. The weather in our lives changes rapidly. It storms, it gets freezing cold. It is utterly unpredictable and often destructive.
If you stand in the middle of a Category 5 hurricane in your life, look at the wreckage and say, God must hate me, you are reading the weather. You are not reading the text.
That is a crucial framing. We cannot let our circumstances dictate our theology. Christ's active intercession means that he knows your trial intimately. He governs its boundaries. And he is praying for you with perfect, infinite wisdom, even when you cannot feel it.
The darkest, most isolated hospital room on earth is not beyond the attention of heaven's high priest. Just because there is an absence of immediate physical relief does not mean there is an absence of priestly care.
And realizing this should completely transform your prayer life. So many of us suffer from functional prayerlessness because we are living in that self-sufficiency. Or when we do pray, we feel overwhelmed by how pathetic our prayers are. We feel like our prayers are weak, distracted, selfish, and poorly expressed.
We feel like we have to string together the perfect theological buzzwords just to catch God's attention, like a lawyer presenting a flawless opening statement.
But the beauty of this doctrine is that you're not trying to catch God's attention from scratch. You enter the throne room through a mediator who is already actively engaged on your behalf.
The authors paint this incredibly beautiful picture. Your weak, broken, half-formed, distracted prayers are caught by your high priest. As they pass through his pierced hands, he cleanses them. He perfumes them with the sweet incense of his own flawless merit, and he presents them as perfectly acceptable and beautiful before the Father's throne.
Therefore, you can pray boldly. You can pray when the words come easily and eloquently, and you can pray when you have no words left at all, and your prayers are just exhausted groans of lament on the living room floor. He translates the groans.
Let us pull all of this together because we have covered a massive amount of ground today.
We started by exploring the terror of those first-century Hebrew Christians, stripped of their visible temples, their rituals, and their earthly priests, wondering if they were safe. We saw how the author of Hebrews pointed them away from the dying shadows and toward Jesus, the ultimate high priest, after the order of Melchizedek, possessing an indestructible, unbreakable life that death cannot touch.
We unpacked the glorious, comprehensive reality of ease to Pantelis that Christ saves to the absolute uttermost. He leaves no part of your redemption up to your own fragile effort or moral maintenance. We noted the exclusive, narrow, yet beautifully sufficient path of drawing near to God through him alone, putting on the fireproof suit of his righteousness.
And we peered into the supreme court of heaven to see the gentle and lowly Savior. He is not a deistic clockmaker who walked away. He is actively, relentlessly interceding for you today, taking your brokenness, your sin, and your suffering, and presenting his perfect blood. You are not maintaining your own salvation. You are being carried by a living king.
Which brings us right back to where we started. That feeling of walking out of the courtroom, acquitted but terrified of facing the next day on your own.
I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over as you go about the rest of your week. We spend so much of our spiritual lives agonizing over our own grip. We agonize over whether our grip on Jesus is strong enough to save us. We endlessly analyze the quality of our faith, our daily performance, our fluctuating feelings, constantly checking our own spiritual pulse to see if we are still alive.
But what if your ultimate security has absolutely nothing to do with the fragile strength of your grip on him, and everything to do with the indestructible strength of his grip on you?
If the sovereign of the universe, the high priest, with an indestructible life, is actively speaking your name in the throne room of heaven today, what earthly fear could possibly stand against you?